It's probably sort of end of February, early March 2020. Don Tony Fauci, he calls me 1:30 in the morning, wakes me up, and he's just like, hey, Rocko, things are getting sketchy over here. They're getting serious. We're going to need to lay low for a while. We're going to need you to come to your country, chill out. I'm like, what do you mean? What do you mean, how long? He's like, for 2 weeks. We need 2 weeks to flatten the curb. And I was like, 2 weeks to flatten the curb? I didn't know what he's talking about. Why do you need 2 weeks to flatten a curb, okay? I've been working in the cement business a long time making shoes. You don't need 2 weeks. You just need a couple hours, right? If you're trying to get the pavement to a sidewalk and you're trying to get a nice sort of elevation there, it only takes a couple hours to dry, all right? If you're looking for quick drying cement, just go to Jimmy Bambino's car, parked by the docks at the Hudson River, okay? He's got 100 pounds left of that he used for the Jimmy Hoffa job in his 1984 LeBaron. He won on The Price is Right. I'm like, Tony, what are you talking about? 2 weeks? Okay, anyway, so then a couple weeks turned into a couple months turned into a couple freaking years. Then Tony's all like, hey, Rocko, you and the family, we're gonna have to change things up a little bit. We're gonna need to inject you with some magic juice. And I'm like, hey, with all due respect, boss, last time some jabroni tried to inject me with his magic juice, I put his head in the prison bars, okay? When I was doing a nickel up in Sing Sing. Then Tony's like, hey, Rocko, you're a hothead, just like your old man. Just relax. You misunderstood me. What I'm saying is, when I'm talking about the magic juice, the friends of ours that come from the guys at Pfizer. I'm like, Pfizer? He's like, yeah, you know the guys that made the pills that make your dick get hard when you give it to your guma. I was like, oh, those guys. He's like, don't worry about it. They're good guys, all right? These pills have been doing wonders for the family. And he's like, don't tell me you haven't been using that little pill, okay? I seen your wife, all right? I'm like, hey, boss, guilty as charged. Okay, so now Tony's like, all right, now that we got the juice, he's like, well, we're gonna need to have a passport to prove it. I'm like, what are you talking about, boss? I don't understand, boss. And he's just like, look, don't you want to feel cosmopolitan and worldly? It's great. Now you could be a dual citizen of Brooklyn and COVID. I'm like, that's cool. I always wanted to have a couple things on the go. Then he said, Rocko, this is good news and bad news, right? The bad news is we're gonna have to close the gyms down. The good news is the casinos, they can stay open. I'm like, you know what? I'm fine with that, boss, all right? I don't mind if the gym is closed, as long as I can still wear my tracksuit when I hang outside of a delicatessen for the entire afternoon. And it's good the casinos are open because it's what they call it, an essential service, because a lot of people, they got gambling addictions, all right? And they need to be handled with tender, loving care, okay? Plus, Pfizer, they make this medication, you know, for the gambling addicts. You know, it doesn't cure the addiction, you know, but it just prevents them from jumping off a bridge in between paycheck to paycheck. It's a win for us. It's a win for Pfizer. For the gambling degenerate, not so much. But what are you gonna do? That's life. So then Donald Trump, right, he starts shooting off his mouth, going on and on and on about like, hey, I think it came from a lab in Chinatown or something like that. You know, when I took great offense to that, I'm like, what are you talking about? I came from a lab in Chinatown. As somebody who owns several laundromats in Chinatown that have labs underneath them, I take great offense to that. That's a stereotype, okay? Look, I don't make viruses. I make methamphetamines. Is he trying to accuse me? All right? Is he trying to pin his finger at me? All right, look, I'm very offended at that, okay? What I'm doing, it's an essential service. So then Tony says we got to do something. We got to maintain social distance when we're doing hit jobs, when we're doing something, when we're whacking a guy. And I'm like, what are you talking about, boss? I'm like, can I stab a guy with an ice pick? He's like, no, you're too close to the guy. I'm like, what about piano wire? He's like, again, you're too close for a guy. I'm like, could I put a plastic bag over the guy's head? And he's like, okay, I'll let that slide because that substitutes as a mask and the droplets can't come out when you're choking on the guy. But he's like, I prefer it if you stand 6 feet away when you're putting 2 bullets in the guy's back of the head, okay? Because it's one thing if he's got COVID, but you might have COVID and you give it to him. And just because you're killing the guy doesn't give you an excuse to make him sick. You get a guy sick before you shoot him in the head and throw him in the Hudson River, people are going to think you're some kind of insensitive asshole and you don't take this pandemic seriously. I'm like, okay, boss, I'm a sensitive guy. And then Tony, out of nowhere, says to me, Rocko, we're going to need to close down the bars. And I took off my glasses. I was so perturbed. And I looked right at the phone and I said, with all due respect, boss, you know that's not gonna happen. And he says to me, all right, look, we'll make an exception. We'll serve linguine, all right? That way we could call it a restaurant, all right? Because Our scientists found out that the virus can't be transmitted when you're eating food because it's got table manners. He says, but as long as you don't have clam on the linguine. It's like, why is that? He's like, this clam is disgusting, okay? Anything that slimy shouldn't be on a plate. It should be in my ball sack. And I was like, classic Tony baloney. Okay, we're done here. Can I take this wire off? You know we guys don't like wearing a wire, huh? Hey, you got close to my watch, right? My ring? You get that? Okay, cool. Hey, what about my gun? You like my gun? Just got this the other day. I feel like a cowboy, you know? Just spinning around. I feel like a movie star, you know? I feel like I'm Alec Baldwin.